Welcome to an Expats Russia. In this episode, we're going to talk about how two Americans ended up going to Russia. Welcome to an Expats Russia, where we dive deep into what Russia has to offer expats. Here are your hosts, Matt and Marcus. Matt is the founder of Expatriant, which helps expats find jobs in Russia, and Marcus founded Let's Russia to make it easy to get a Russian visa. Between the two of them, they have over 15 years of experience in Russia. Is Russia the place for you? Let's find out. Matt, we're just going to kick it off with the first question. How did you end up going to Russia?
Sure. So obviously, everyone has their story of how they got to Russia. Mine is not the most interesting, but the timeline that led up to it, I think, was probably longer than most people. And I actually had no background in Russia. So I actually ended up in Russia the first time by accident. My university was going to Russia, the business school. I was studying finance. Every year did a trip to another country to study what business is like abroad. And they just happened to be going to Russia. And a good friend of mine said, Matt, the business school is going to Russia. I want to go on the trip. Do you want to go with me? And I said, well, I've never really been anywhere outside the U.S. Why not? And that's how I ended up in Russia the first time. We went for 2 weeks. And that kicked off something that led to probably the biggest change in my entire life, these 2 weeks.
Well, what year was that?
That was in 2009.
Okay, 2009. All right. So what was the time span between when you heard about the trip and when you actually went?
So I think it was probably about December or January when I heard about the trip, and my friend and I had discussed it, and the trip was in May.
Okay.
So not that much time.
Yeah. And
a couple months.
And what was the commitment involved when you said, yeah, I think I want to go, and then did you put out, pay for the course or whatever? And so there was a point of no return, right?
Yeah. So it was so essentially it was a course, a whole semester-long course, at least equivalent to a semester-long course, done in 2 weeks, because it was obviously intense all day, every day for 2 weeks. So when I decided I wanted to do this in December or January, I had to pay a deposit. I think it was $1,000. And the whole course was, you had to pay for the credits like any other course at the university. And then on top of that, it was, I think, $3,300. And you had to pay immediately a deposit of $1,000.
Okay. And prior to that, you had never been to Russia or Eastern Europe?
I grew up in, exactly. I'd never actually even left North America. So I grew up in Maine, and I had been to Quebec a number of times, which is about as foreign as you can get in North America. Yeah. But aside from that, I'd never left the United States.
Okay. I had a similar experience. My first trip to Russia was completely out of the blue, I would say. In 2005, I was a freshman at BYU, and I was thinking, where could I go to? I wanted to participate in another study abroad program.
Yeah.
My mom's German, so I didn't want to go to Germany. I wanted to experience a new language. So I was just looking online for programs and in Western Europe, and they were all really expensive. So my main motivator was, find a cheaper program.
Sure.
And I was just talking to a friend and saying, I can't afford a study abroad program. Rome was like $12,500. France was very similar outside of the plane ticket. So you're adding the travel costs to there,
right.
And then my good friend he said, "Where is Anna Kournikova from?" And at that
I
moment,
find it funny that you remember all of this. You remember specifically this conversation about Anna Kournikova.
Well,
because I've heard this story a couple of times.
I don't know. I mean, let's see. 2005, she was famous. I mean, I don't know what her peak tennis career was, but I definitely knew exactly what he was talking about, and I didn't think of Anna Kournikova, but I knew she was from Russia, and so I was like, I think she's from Russia. And then I went home and I looked at programs specifically in in Russia, I hadn't thought about Ukraine or Russia or any Eastern European country.
Right.
And so thanks to Anna Kournikova, I headed to Russia. No, I did find, a program. It was under $6,000. And then I went through a U.S. University. My university didn't have a program at the time, but the whole reason I went to Russia the first time was because it was significantly cheaper than Western Europe. So
interesting. And like I said, I ended up in Russia the first time quite simply almost by accident. I wasn't intending to go to Russia. There was no sort of connection to Russia for me. It's funny because when you get to Russia, most people who are there have some connection to Russia. Maybe it's lineage, or they studied Russian history, or the Russian language in school. But I mean, both of us really had no connection when we first decided to go to Russia.
Yeah, I've heard several times where people have started studying Russian because they wanted to. Well, they read Russian literature in English, and they loved it so much they were like, I got to read it in the original language. So I've heard that a couple times, that they started learning Russian just because of art or something like that, or cultural things. And then I just wanted to learn a different language and do it rather inexpensively. So that was kind of my and I had no idea what to expect.
Well, I was just going to ask, did you have any expectations when you were going to Russia? Because for me personally, I didn't honestly even know the first thing about Russia. Of course, once I signed up for the class, they had like these little preparation classes. I think it was once a week for an hour or something leading up. And they told us a few things about Russia, what to watch out for, this and that. And we learned a few Russian words. But outside of that, I really had absolutely no expectations. I didn't read anything about Russia. YouTube wasn't as big as it is today. I mean, today you could go on YouTube and learn almost everything about Russia. You could see how Russian people live and learn about, what is it, dacha. But back in those days, it seems crazy, but 2009, only 11 years ago, the amount of content about Russia was so, maybe it was there, I don't know. I just didn't know about it, but I had just about no expectation before going.
Yeah, I think it's one of those topics that you have to go out and actively search, because it just doesn't pop into your mind. Like when I was growing up, although I grew up in a German-American family, I did travel outside the U.S. quite often, but still, when I think I was 18 when I decided to go to Russia, I never even thought about anything related to Russia. So I don't remember talking about Russian cultural like aspects in our history class or high school or anything. So it's kind of just, my expectations were non-existent.
Yeah,
so
that's similar to me. Yeah.
So before you went, so you signed up for the course. Before you went, you kind of looked more into it. Was it? What were your feelings going up to as the trip came closer?
I was just excited to see a new country. Okay. And actually, at the end of the day, that friend who invited me to go on the trip ended up not being able to go.
Oh, okay.
So I ended up going with all these people I didn't know, some of whom are still my best friends.
But were they U.S. Students at the same university?
Yeah, they were all from all U.S. students, all from the same university, the University of Maine.
Okay. And how did your, I guess, lack of expectations, how did that differ from, I guess if you don't have any expectations, you don't know what what you're going to see.
Yeah.
But
well, I would say most of the people who went on the trip, none of us had really traveled abroad. Okay. At least no one had done so extensively.
Mm-hmm. So when you got to Russia, what were your first impressions?
Well, I will never forget going out onto Red Square when we first got there. It was just like an incredible new world. Like, the thought was, how does something like this exist outside of the United States? I know that seems strange for me to say that today, but that was absolutely my thought back when it was happening, was there's this incredible world out there.
Yeah.
And, obviously coming from the United States, we have these stereotypes about Russia, that people are cold and mean, or, the weather's not nice, it's dark. All of these just weird stereotypes, and I found that none of them were true. The people were incredibly nice, incredibly hospitable. all of the culture and things to see in Russia were so much more interesting than anything I'd ever seen in my life, actually.
It's funny that, I mean, you recall some of the cultural stereotypes, but I don't recall any of that before even when I got there, I didn't know that people had certain stereotypes. I've never heard in the US, but I've heard from Russians, like bears walk the street, everyone drinks vodka.
Well, they drink a lot.
Cold.
You had never heard that? That was definitely one of the things that I think us as kids were, in college, were looking forward to. Oh, they drink a lot in Russia. This is going to be fun.
I had never heard specifically about Russians. No, I mean that's how I mean blocked it was to me. I mean, I've heard that about different countries, but it didn't seem, when people told me that, why did you end up going to Russia, or how was it? And I'm like, when they told me the stereotypes, I was confused because I had never heard that stereotype before. So, my first impressions were, of course, I had no expectations, so I didn't know what I would see, but I kind of just, I landed in the winter. This guy picked me up from the university, like, study abroad program, this Russian guy with a mustache. He was pretty tall. I'm kind of short, so everyone's tall to me. He had my name spelled wrong on the like, piece of paper, but it looked scribbled, like he wrote it with a pen, and he had my name spelled wrong, and I was like, and it was, so I landed in the evening, so it was dark, and it was in the winter, so there's not a lot of daylight anyway. We get on MKAD, the main highway around Moscow, and he's like driving in the middle of the lanes, and I'm like, can you stay in your lane? I'm like, by the time I got to the university, I had like, I was holding on to the seat, probably with indents in it, but yeah, it was kind of interesting, the first, but I didn't feel terribly like, oh, what have I done, or where am I? I lived in a dorm and with other Americans, and it was fine after that. It was kind of just like I was bright-eyed and like kind of taking it all in because it was so different.
Right. Well, like I said, I had no expectations whatsoever. I remember arriving at the airport, getting on the bus, and then just riding. I can't remember which highway it was from Sheremetyevo. It was probably Leningradsky Prospect. And just looking out the window, like, what is this place? This is so different than rural Maine, where I grew up. That it was just unbelievable for all of us. We were just like glued to the windows, looking out. Like, what is this? We're in a completely different world. I actually wondered a lot, what would have happened if my first trip abroad had been to, let's say, Germany, which doesn't honestly look that much. Well, all of my ideas of Germany are after having been in Russia. So, but generally, Germany doesn't look that much different than the U.S. But depending on the city, it still can look, a bit different if it's an East German city. Mm-hmm. I always wonder what would my impressions have been of Russia had I been to other countries first.
Yeah.
I'll never know, obviously, but.
Well, my relatives in Germany, when I first, so before the study abroad, I headed to Germany. I had a problem with the visa, but I had my German passport. So I went to Germany waiting for the visa. And I was like, okay, well, I'll just wait till I get the visa. And I was telling my relatives that I'm going to Russia. And it's odd to me that Germany, Western Europe is so close to Russia. It's like 2.5, 3 hour flight, 3.5 hour, depending on where you're going. But it's so close, and their perception of Russia is so far from the truth. Yeah, because absolutely. I would think that in the U.S., because you're even farther, it would be farther from the truth. But so my relatives were like, "Why are you going to Russia? I heard this, I heard that," and when I was like, "I don't know, we'll see." So when I got there, I was like, people, they have subway, they have you know, 2005 they didn't have as many fast food chains, but they're all over. They were still, you could find them, and now they're
Right.
all over the place. So
Right. It's actually incredible how much Moscow has changed since even 2009. You were there in 2005, so I imagine that it changed just as fast or even faster between 2005 and 2009. But from 2009 to 2020, just unbelievable difference, isn't it?
yeah, it's like a whole different city to me. The mentality has changed.
Yeah.
The family unit has changed even, so there are more families having kids.
Yeah.
In 2005, I don't know. I was like kind of this naive young kid, so I didn't really get a lot of things, you know. You kind of just passes by you. You don't really think about it so deeply. But over the years, I noticed how different it was.
Yeah. Well, I'd be interested to know, why did you end up deciding to go back to Russia and to live in Russia? Because I know you've lived in Russia for a number of years, as have I. And what made you decide? At least you had spent a semester there. Before I moved to Russia, I had only been there for a total of 4 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you had at least spent a semester before you went back to Russia to live.
Yeah. So I was getting ready to go on my study abroad. It was 4 months, January 2005 to April 2005, and I just remember. So when I first went to university, my major was linguistics, and I really liked traveling and learning languages. So when I got to Russia, I did study hard for those 4 months. I went out and practiced and talked to everyone I could, and which was really, if you're going to learn a language, Russian is nice just because a lot of people don't speak English very well, like Germany, like
Right.
you mentioned. If you go try to speak German, people are like, let's just speak English. And you're like,
Right.
you don't get to practice it. But
Well, I always tell people the most important barrier you have to get across if you're learning a language is you need to speak that language better than the average person speaks English.
yes,
And as soon as you pass that barrier, it becomes incredibly easy
yes,
to advance further.
that's for sure. I mean, I felt in my group I was doing quite well, and I could go out and I'm typically a shy person, but I was in Russia. I didn't know anybody, so I didn't really care. So I would go out and talk to people, and at the end of the 4 months, I knew I wouldn't learn Russian if I didn't go back. So
Right.
I went back the second time as a missionary for for the LDS church, and
Yeah.
that's basically, I mean, almost 2 years. So you go to the missionary training center. You have a crash course in Russian, then you go
Yeah.
to Russia, and for an hour each morning, I studied Russian just from textbooks, practicing.
Yeah.
I'd read the materials, write, and then we'd go out and talk to people about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And
Yeah.
that's not the easiest topic to bring
Yeah,
up to people.
I imagine, yeah.
And I went in the winter. I remember specifically, I was in Pskov, small town in near Estonia.
St. Peter's. Yeah.
It's about, I think it's like
Between Moscow and St. Petersburg.
3 to 4 hour bus ride. I can't quite remember, but then it's about an hour outside of of Estonia, the border to Estonia. And so people outside of the big cities are typically more open. And I would just like try to talk to people. Sometimes, they didn't understand me. I didn't understand much of what they were saying either. But I remember one time we were speaking. We went up to this person in really cold weather, and I couldn't pronounce the words that I wanted to say just because it was so cold. My lips were like frozen. But the motivation for me was to perfect my Russian. I really took it as a challenge. I liked the language. I liked learning just the culture through the language because it's so entwined.
Yeah, especially in Russia.
Yeah, and and I just found it fascinating. And then after that, after a mission, I went back to university. Then I went back to Russia to teach English. I married a Russian, and then I stayed in Russia from 2012 to 2019. So I mean, different things kind of it evolved from there, but
Right.
the main driving force was learning Russian. So
Interesting.
what about you?
So my motivation came after I got my first job after college. So I graduated from university, started working in Boston in this bank. It was fine, but it was so boring. And I just remember thinking, this cannot be what I'm going to do for the next 45 years of my life. If it is, this is going to be the worst life. And I said, this would be, even if I was just doing this in Russia, it would be way more interesting. So I worked in that job for almost a year. Maybe it was 10 or 11 months, something like that.
And you had already come back from your two experiences in Russia as a student.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So actually, I should have mentioned this. After I went to Russia the first time with my university, they went again to Russia the next year. And I signed up for this. It was a different course. It counted as a different course. Mm-hmm. But it was a similar trip, and we went back to Russia. And after the second time, I was just like, no, I definitely want to go back someday to Russia to work. Mm-hmm. And then I graduated, started working, like I said, in Boston. Super boring, working in finance. And I said, I can't do this. So I quit my job after 10 or 11 months. And at the time, it was difficult to get a long-term visa to Russia as an American. You could have done a business visa, which I didn't know enough about, so I didn't do that. And I'd say, well, tourist visa is only good for 30 days. I want to go and I want to try to learn Russian.
What year was
this? This was 2012.
2012, okay.
And I said, all right, I'm just going to go to Ukraine, because at the time, Russian in Ukraine was widely spoken, and actually most people spoke or preferred to speak Russian. So I went to Ukraine for 3 months. And I ended up living with a friend I had met on a previous trip to Ukraine. Actually, on spring break, my senior year in college, we went to Ukraine, me and a couple buddies from my fraternity. That was our spring break trip. Everyone was like going to Florida or the Caribbean, and we're like, we're going to Ukraine, and it's going to be freezing cold. Anyway, we went to Ukraine. I met a Ukrainian guy there that I ended up keeping in touch with. And then when I quit my job, I went over to Ukraine, and I ended up living with this guy and his friend. So I was speaking Russian all the time.
Okay.
He could actually speak English pretty well, but since I told him I wanted to learn Russian, he stopped speaking English to me. So I stayed in Ukraine for 3 months, started learning Russian, and then I came back from that, and I was like, oh man, I can't go back to working again in the United States. So I took another temporary job in the US. This was in the beginning of 2013. And as soon as I started that temporary job, I bought a one-way ticket to Russia for that summer. I was like, this is it. I'm going to save up money for the next 5 or 6 months, and then I'm gone to Russia, and I'm going to figure it out. I didn't have any plans, and that's how I ended up in Russia.
But so you spent time in Ukraine, but why didn't you did you ever think that you were going to go back to Ukraine, or the ultimate goal was to go back to Russia?
Well, the ultimate goal was to go back to Russia, because at that point, then I started speaking a bit of Russian, and I thought, well, if I want to learn Russian, you need to do it in Russian. Okay. That's number one. Number two, I also had known some people from those trips that we did to Russia during my university time. I knew a few people in Russia. Some of them were involved in doing types of business in Russia, so I thought, well, at the very least, I'll know some people that I can maybe try to help, get a job. Well, this is a story for another video, but I got to Russia. I ended up traveling all around Russia when I got there. So, and then the Ukraine crisis hit, and it was hard to find a job, and we can get into that in another video. But that's how I ended up in Russia. And then I was in Russia from 2013 to 2018, so 5 years.
5 years, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I think a lot of people... there are a ton of reasons why somebody would want to go to Russia or how they end up in Russia. Mine was learning a different language, kind of seeing something different, saving some money.
Yeah.
Yours was kind of an invitation from a friend at first, and then
Right.
and then again you wanted to perfect your Russian as well, or was it
Right.
that kind of adventure?
Well, it was kind of an adventure. I wanted to try to get international business experience, and I also wanted to learn Russian by the end of it.
Yeah.
And so many people told me, I don't know about you, but they said, "Well, Russian's so hard. You're never going to learn. It's too difficult." And I just wanted to prove all these people wrong.
Yeah. So other people, let's end with this. Other people, how did they end up in Russia? Did they have a similar story, or I know many people go to Russia because they met a Russian girl, and they ended up either temporarily living in Russia or permanently living in Russia.
Yeah, well, I would say all of my best friends in Russia ended up there because they were studying Russian or Russian history or some type of Russian. Of most of the people that I met in Russia, most of them had either met a girl or a guy and were in Russia sort of following their boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah.
That was my experience. But that wasn't, I would say, yeah. I mean, there's so many reasons. I mean, if we started talking about why people went to Russia, it's actually kind of funny to think about some of the reasons. Yeah. I actually heard the other day from a friend, he met someone in Russia who was there because he was trying to escape from his ex-wife.
In the US?
No, he was from the UK. He was trying to disappear in Russia. So there's all these weird reasons.
That's a good topic for another video too.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, you've heard it from Matt and me, how we first got to Russia. It wasn't completely, what we wanted to do in the beginning, but something drove us to Russia. And in the next videos, we'll talk about a lot of the tangents that we were about to pursue. And so follow along. And if you're thinking of going to Russia, it's definitely a unique place.
Absolutely. And I would just say that both of us now have tried to start our own businesses centered around helping other people go to Russia. So Marcus started Let's Russia, and I started Expatriate with my brother, who actually coincidentally lives in Ukraine right now.
Yeah, so we help people with the visas going to Russia, and Matt, you help people find jobs.
Yeah.
So check it out if you're interested in going to Russia, and we'll see you in the next video.
If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, and subscribe for more. This was an Expats Russia.